Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 141 with Collin Brazie, DP of Blackout. Enjoy.
It's funny, the world seems so big, but then small at the same time, you know what I mean? Like the production and cinematography world. And it seems really big, but then at the same time, you like run into people. And another one of your guests that you just had on recently, Sherry Talk.
Oh, yeah, literally Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had just listened to that one like this morning, and her and I had films on the festival circuit at the same time. And so I remember I met her at a couple film festivals. And we had, we're friends on social media. Again, I haven't spoken to her in like 6 years or something like that. I remember like meeting her on the festival circuit. What's she up to nowadays? And was listening to it. And then I was listening to the podcast. And I was like, oh, holy shit. Like we grew up like 10 minutes from each other.
No
like
kidding.
She's like, oh yeah, I'm from like Tip City, Ohio. And I was like, wait, what? Like I had no idea she was from like the Dayton area. Yeah, she literally like grew up like we grew up like 10 minutes from each other, which is like insane. Yeah. I had no idea. But yeah.
It is funny, like, you don't really think about it. I think when you get into this industry, you think like, oh, it's an industry. Mm-hmm. Like, there's going to be a million people. And then after however long I've been here, which is not very long, it's like, oh, damn, like, when people say, like, don't burn bridges, they fucking mean it. Like, you'll get out.
Yeah, especially, it's like, I always kind of told myself, especially, like, early on in the career and stuff like that, it's like, it feels like a lot of making it in the industry is just sticking around. It's found, it's like having the willpower and having the know-how and figuring out how to like, stick around and make it work even when like things aren't going super well or when you're not making a ton of money. It's just like figuring it out and being able to stick around. It's like, I feel like that's like one of the most important parts of the business.
Dude, the pandemic, I saw so many people be like, well, I'm moving back just to wherever I'm out,
Yeah, for sure. I'm
going to start bartending. Yeah, it's definitely not, that is something that kind of sucks about it. It's like, unless you have multiple revenue streams, a lot of times it's like.
It's real hard to just be doing like a single thing, especially like early on and whatnot. Yeah.
How did you get started?
So how did I get started? So I got started like a lot of people where it was like, I was really interested in making videos and things like that when I was in like high school. If a teacher gave us a project where it was like, oh yeah, you can do a report or a PowerPoint or you can make a video. It was like, I was always like, I'm going to make a video or I'm going to go do something goofy with my friends and call it a project. You know what I mean?
I did that every time.
Yeah. And so that's kind of where like, I guess initially started like, and growing up in Ohio, it was like the idea of like being a filmmaker for a living, like didn't really commute or really like, you know what I mean? There was nobody in my life who was like, oh yeah, that's something you can do for a living or that, that's like a passion you can pursue. So then when I went to undergrad at Seton Hall University, which is on the East Coast and it's like right outside New York City. And I love the proximity, but I didn't go there for like film initially. I had gone there for, I was like a business major and I was in the business school and gone there and then was in that for like 3 semesters and like hated it. And then started exploring like the other passions that I had, which were like photography and filmmaking and stuff like that. And so then I like basically transferred, ended up double majoring in like communications, film and television production and business. And then I went to grad school and then I went to Chapman University and did my MFA there. And did the cinematography program. And so that's, and then, so spent time out in Southern California for a while. And then, after school moved up to LA and worked in LA for, doing lots of different things, for 8 or 9 years. And I moved to Brooklyn like 7 years ago. So.
Oh, damn. All right. So you really did hit the whole, except for Atlanta, you're pretty much all over.
Yeah. So I was based in LA for basically post grad school. Yeah. For, like 7-8 years. And now I've been in New York for like 7.
So. Right. Yeah. It was the, I guess, maybe a little too young to have a beat on this, but like a lot of people say, most cities I grew up in a tiny little town, but like, most cities people don't even conceive of a film industry? Did you have enough friends to shoot stuff extracurricularly, or was it always like school projects and stuff like that?
No, it was definitely more like school projects and stuff like that. It wasn't like, I wish I could claim I was one of those like 8-year-olds who was running around with a camera and making little like, stop motion, videos or something like stop motion, little short films. But no, it was very much like I would do it for like school. And then once I was in college, I was like making short films. And that's when I was like really like getting into the idea of like, oh yeah, this is like maybe what I want to do as far as a career, and exploring like, really understanding what the camera is doing, understanding editing and things of that nature. More as far as like growing up in a small town, things like that. Like honestly, like my dad just loved going to the movies a lot, and so he would take me, and he would take me and my siblings and stuff like that. And so we watched like a lot of movies, went to the movies a lot, and so it was just kind of like and then I think once I started, probably around like 7th, 8th grade, I started going to like the art house theater in Dayton, and so then that kind of like opens up your idea to like, oh, what a movie can be and what sort of different movies are out there other than just your, like bigger, like Indiana Jones type movies and stuff like that you watch when you're, really young.
Yeah. What were some of those films? Because I was certainly not like when I got to film school, I went to Arizona State, but when I got to film school, they were like, all right, well, this is, whatever, Citizen Kane. And I was like, this sucks. I don't.
Right. You're like, yeah.
Apocalypse Now, that's rad. Let's keep doing that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, back to some films that definitely like always like stuck with me and are still some favorites to this day are like, like Fargo, like that definitely came out when I was born in 85. So it was like that movie came out, I think when I was like 11. I probably saw it when I was like 12 or 13 or something like that, so that was always one that really stuck with me and is still probably one of my favorites, like even now. Like Good Will Hunting was a big film for me when I, again, also came out when I was in like 6th, 7th grade, something like that. Another one that I loved in high school, I haven't watched it in a while. I imagine it still holds up to an extent, but it was like Clerks, like his Kevin Smith's first film. Was a huge fan of that just because in the same way that he always cites Slacker being a big influence on him, being like, oh, like I can go do that. I could figure that out. You know what I mean? It was the same thing with like Clerks, where it was like, I would watch that movie over and over again. And, obviously, the cinematography of it and, the camera placement, it was like, it's very minimalist, but it does have a quality to it that is like, oh, this is like something I could do. This is achievable. You know what I mean? It's not like you're not watching like Jurassic Park or something where it's like, oh, this seems like insurmountable. Like I can't even understand how you would do any of this. But like you see a movie like Clerks or movie like Before Sunset or something like that, and you're like, oh yeah, like this is a different type of filmmaking, but you're still creating, you're still doing something. It's these more intimate stories about people, and yeah, it just something clicks about that when you're like younger, I think, and a little bit more impressionable, where you're like, oh yeah, like this seems like I could maybe get into this, Yeah.
For me, it was specifically Clerks, and then very soon after that, watching Dogma, because I was like, wait, the Clerks guy made this? Because it was the same thing where I was like, I could make Clerks, and then Dogma, I was like, well, I can't make that, but he made that, so that means I should be able to make that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
This is a stupid story, and I'm already going to take up too much time telling it. But when I was younger, I was like 13. I was on the View Askew forums, and Jay had just gotten out of rehab, so they threw a party for him.
Oh yeah,
and Ming Chen, who was the web admin of the forum, didn't know that I was 13 and invited me to New Jersey to go to this party. So my mom and I fly out to Red Bank, New Jersey, and she just fucking drops me off at a bowling alley at like 10 p.m. with all these other people. And I'm dressed like Jay from Dogma, like full cosplay, minus the hair. And as I'm walking around with my fucking autograph book, just I'm watching all, like Brian O'Halloran, Brian Johnson, like all these guys, Kevin. They're all just like, oh, what the fuck are you? Okay, I've got my little camcorder. It was
That's hilarious. Sounds like you got a cool mom.
Well, uh, she, she certainly was supportive to do that. But yeah, weird stuff like that can make the industry seem more approachable. I don't know if anyone would do that these days, but late 90s, early 2000s. Fuck it, let's all meet up, strangers.
Sure. Yeah, strangers. Yeah, absolutely.
Good times. Have you seen his new some of his newer stuff, like shit, what was it? The like Tusk?
I did see, I think Tusk might be one of the last ones of his that I saw. I did see Tusk. Actually, I remember because I was living in LA at the time and I saw it at the ArcLight, and he did like a Q&A afterward, and he's such a great, like public speaker,
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a fun night out for sure. A couple of us went out and saw it at the now defunct ArcLight. But yeah, that was the last one. I don't think I've seen. I know he just did like a Clerks 3. I've not seen that.
I saw it. Was very. He's in his emo era for that one.
Right. Yeah,
he's really feeling feelings.
Yeah, but yeah. So I haven't seen Clerks 3. Trying to think what else he did before that.
Red State.
Oh, he did Red State. Yeah, I saw Red State. I think that was before Tusk, though. I think
yeah.
But I liked Red State. I remember liking Red State when I watched it.
Yeah,
definitely different avenue for him too.
Totally. Mm-hmm. So when you're watching a film like Fargo as a kid, was it just the general film experience, or were you at that point paying attention to the cinematography?
I mean, I think early on it's just more or less storytelling. You're like, oh, this is like different than what you're used to seeing. It's such a distinct point of view. It's very distinct type of filmmaking, and I think that's kind of what like you ends up sticking with you. You know what I mean? It's just like these either like odd but beautiful moments. You know what I mean? Like just like the car ride back after the wood chipper stuff. Like all that stuff that just seems like so unique and like out of the ordinary. When you're, when you see a movie like that, when you're like 12, 13 or something like that, I think that was really like more just like, oh yeah, the storytelling was just so much different than, what you would have been watching like in those formative years, like leading up to it. But I do remember in like Good Will Hunting, like I do remember the Gus Van Sant film, like the feats of like, I remember them like, over cranking the film. I remember there being slow motion shots. I remember there being like depth of field changes, and I remember there being like harsher types of lighting, like there was some stuff that was slightly overexposed and underexposed, and like even though I probably didn't know like what that all was at the time, it still like affects you. You know what I mean? It's like it's doing what great cinematography should do, where it's like it's emotionally manipulating you without you realizing it. It's helping tell the story. It's helping get across what the director and the screenwriter and everybody, like the intent of what was going on. Without drawing like too much attention to yourself. So it's but I think they're like looking back on it, there was definitely like moments from that film too where I'm like, oh yeah, this is like resonating with me in a different way.
Yeah. So the film school question often comes up, but I'm actually kind of fascinated by the idea of was it like a business minor, or you just bailed on it altogether?
Yeah, well, it was funny. Yeah, I mean, I ended up basically, like double majoring like business and comm and production, and then I had an Asian studies minor actually as well.
See, you did it the smart way though. I think like whenever I tell like students or whatever what to do, quote unquote, I'm always like, yeah, go to college. I don't know if you really need to go to film school. You just hang out, like go find the kids who are in film school and just offer to help them. I would have really loved having a bit, like I got to do my taxes still, like a business degree would have been smart.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a good thing to be able to fall back on. Yeah, I mean, the film school thing is always, I always tell people when they ask you like, oh, should I go to film school? Should I do this? I'm always like I think you get you get out of it what you put into it. You know what I mean? Like I had a good film school experience because I put a lot into it. The people I was there with put a lot into it. You're all working on each other's films. It's set up a conservatory style, like Chapman at the time, and they had just opened a brand new like state of the art building that was like $50-60 million or something like that. So they had just like opened up a brand new film building with sound stages and like a cinematography workshop stage and different sound stages where you could like build your sets on and shoot your short films on and stuff like that. So like I had an advisor in undergrad who was like, if you're going to go to film school, because he had gone to NYU for grad school and then he was teaching, and he was like, if you're going to go to film school, like the place you should go to is the place that's going to have the best equipment and the best access to the equipment. So like whatever you can just like, they're going to give you like free reign. They're going to let you take it out on the weekends and like, or let you take it out during the summer or different breaks. Like that's going to be where you're going to learn the most, is just taking out the gear and going like doing stuff. So that was like a big thing for me. And with Chapman having just like redone a lot of their facilities and they had just like bought a whole bunch of new equipment, it was like a no-brainer for me. It was like, oh yeah, this is like a good place to be.
Yeah. Did they have you shooting film ever, or was that?
So yeah, it was like, I think my class actually was the last class where all of our thesis films were shot on film, either 35 or 16. So it was like, we were doing digital projects in our first like year or two, but then once you were doing your like, you know, more sophisticated projects, if you will, and your like thesis projects, they were basically all on film. So it was like, we were the last year that was all 35, I think. And then after that, it was like the Red, you know, because at that time, like they didn't have like good full frame,
right,
like cinema cameras, but then the Red came out, I think the following
DDX.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, so then once, you know, the Red came in and, what was the Genesis, that
wasn't the Genesis.
Yeah, exactly. It was like once they had those come out, then stuff started changing. Obviously the quality of those cameras developed so quickly. And, you know, then it was like every 18 months there was a new digital cinema camera coming out. But we were, you know, we were the last hope of 35 millimeter film when we were film school, which I enjoyed. You know, it's like, there's a lot to be said for learning to shoot on film, I think. And I think there's still a lot of stuff that I, you know, practice in the way that has shaped my eye, shaped the way that I approach certain things, is because you like learn shooting film versus learning shooting digital. And I think you make a lot more mistakes, and you learn a lot from mistakes, and you learn a lot more from mistakes than you do from your successes. And so that's also a thing that I think when you're shooting film early on is, you know, something that probably at the time you're pulling your hair out over, but like in the long run might have been good for you.
I honestly like, so before I went to college, I went to New York Film Academy in LA, and they had us shoot 16 the whole time.
Yeah.
And I at this point, I think, you know, it's not terribly expensive to shoot 16. If you were, I just priced it out because someone got real mad on the internet. A couple people got real mad on the internet about Hoyta at the Oscars suggesting that people try film, and they were like,
right,
that's way too expensive. I can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like a little taken aback by it, because like, he's not saying you have to. He's just suggesting. I mean, the man's trying to keep a medium alive. Like, right, you know, he's advocating for something he likes. But I priced it out, and if you were to do a 1 hour, I think I priced it for a 3-to-1 ratio shooting for an hour. And plus rentals, if you were to use the camera I learned on, which is that
the 3 lens,
the 3 lens, yeah,
XR, yeah.
It was like $2,800.
Arri-X,
Arri-Flex, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if you were to dedicate that money to a project, that's not terrible. I get what people are saying, like to own and learn on something, that's gonna. Yeah, you can't do that perpetually. But for one project, like, you know, it's not terrible. Yeah. But I do feel like it teaches you exposure. That's the most important. Like, just grab a 35 stills camera and learn exposure, because I still see amazing stuff that could be amazing today, where it's like you just shot it too bright. Like,
yeah. I mean, it definitely. Exposure is a big thing when you're shooting on film. Obviously, when you're exposing digitally as well. But it definitely. Because monitors have gotten so good now too. Monitors, when you're on set and when you're shooting digitally, it's definitely changes the way you can take risks. You know what I mean? It definitely changes the way that you can be like, oh yeah, I see I've got a little bit of room there. I can underexpose that. You know what I mean? You can look at your raw image and you can look at the waveform and you're like, oh yeah, like I'm okay. Like, I know everybody else is saying it's dark, but I know what's there, and I know we'll be able to like fish out there and post, you know? Whereas like, yeah, it's a completely different ballgame when you're shooting film and you're kind of like, yeah, maybe I should, it was the old rule of thumb of like, overexpose everything like 2/3 a stop just so that you get a little thicker negative. And, that was like the big thing when I was in film school is like, you'd have, one cinematography professor being like, don't be afraid of the dark. And the other one would be like, yeah, you should probably like get a deeper negative on that next time.
Yeah.
Probably, set your light meter to 320 so you get a little thicker negative on that. But it's like, it's all about experimenting, when you were in film school and stuff like that. And going back to your comment about like the price of film, I've shot some like commercially stuff on film. I haven't done a narrative project on film in quite some time. But I know like, somebody like Alex Ross Perry is like a big proponent of shooting on film, and he shoots a lot of his projects on 16 and 35. And he says the same thing. Like you probably, echo what Hoyt was saying, where it's like, yeah, like you can do it. Like, it's just a matter of like anything. It's like price it out. And, and if you set aside money for it, for the budget, like, you can make it work. Like, yes, it's not going to be as cheap as just like, grabbing a 5D and, shooting, but it's doable. It's doable, especially like on a much bigger budget. I think like, obviously if you're working on like a studio budget or like a bigger film like that, the amount of money they're spending on hard drives and camera packages and everything like that, it's like, I think it's pretty negligible as far as like the difference in cost would be.
Yeah. Well, and I was just thinking like, when I was pricing it out, I was like, when I do event coverage or if I do like a corporate interview video or whatever, those, you shoot for about an hour. So it's like, if you really wanted that to be on film, you could like, I don't know, you can, for a corporate video, especially, you can easily clear 8-10 grand, take a haircut on your own price. And if that was what you were, I don't think it would be worth it shooting a corporate interview on film, but if you really wanted to, and find it. But it's hard to find those budgets when you're young.
Right. Starting. Yeah, for sure. And also if you're, just a matter of like, is it right for the project too? It's like right for the specific thing that you're telling.
Yeah. So who are the DPs that kind of shaped the way who are you stealing from, basically?
Bobby Mueller is one that I always come back to. He was a big influence on me, especially once I was in film school and was like really studying the art of cinematography. I love his stuff. I always go back to it. Like Paris, Texas is a movie I go back to time and time again.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I would, I'll steal from that movie every day till I die, probably. It's cliche now, but obviously Roger Deakins, like I said, Fargo was such a huge inspiration on me. It's probably the movie I've seen more than any movie in my life, probably. That's again, one of those movies that like, I, probably know front to back, just like in my brain, like every, image of that is just seared in my brain.
Sure. Those are two good ones.
Should have prepared for this question.
Well, no, because it makes sense because I was checking out your reels too, and they do have. I can see those. I feel like I can see those influences now that you've said it. There's certainly a more sort of naturalistic quality to them.
Another one too, and again, this is back in my like film school days. Another guy that I loved studying was Harris Savitas.
Oh, sure, yes.
He was a huge proponent of lighting the space, like really like, finding location, or if it's a set and like lighting that versus just lighting pockets where the actors are going to land in, you know what I mean? Obviously, if you're coming in for coverage and stuff like that, like you're probably going to want to, lift them up a little bit or give a little, something to them once you're landing in that. But the idea of just like lighting this space, I always just thought was so much more interesting than trying to like light for every single individual shot. And I don't know, there was something that always stuck with me about the way that he approached things as well.
Well, it also makes it easier to glue your subject into I think that's a big beginner mistake too, is like just putting a key light in a room and going like, he's lit,
Right. Sure.
Good job. Where was I going with that one? Oh, good. This has happened to me on like the past 4 interviews. I'm like, I've got something great to ask, and then that shit's gone. Well, so I did want to ask you, what was the film? Because again, I was doing my research as a journalist. What was the film before Blackout? The war film?
Yeah, Foxhole.
Foxhole. How did you get involved in that film, and how did the ASC article come about? Because I would lose my shit if a movie I made ended up on an ASC feature.
Yeah. Obviously, I mean, same. I was excited about that as well. So yeah, the movie Foxhole, it was really, it was an interesting film because it spans 3 different time frames. So it was, a cinematographer's dream to be able to be like, oh yeah, that, not only is it different time frames, it's different looks, it's different aspect ratios. We did different lens packages for each time period. And how I got involved with that actually was, funny enough, it was through a first AC that I work with a lot. His name's Jesse Locasio. And he had first AC'd on a bunch of movies for Glass Eye Pix, which is Larry Fazenden's production company based in New York. And so he had worked on a lot of their movies, and then I had worked with him on a few commercials. And so Jesse and I become friends, and when they were looking for a DP for that film, since he was kind of was close with them already, he threw my name in the ring, and I guess they liked my stuff, and then they reached out. And so then I had a conversation with them, and they sent me over the script, and we talked 48 hours later. And next thing you know, we were, it was kind of a quick thing because we started scouting immediately, and we did, a couple weeks of prep, and then we basically started the movie. So it was very quick. I don't know if it was I think it might've been one of those serendipitous things where someone had to drop out and then they were looking for a replacement. Last minute.
I've got a good gig like that.
Yeah. And so it worked out. And like I said, it was like a dream project to work on because it was, different time periods, and, you're trying to get different looks that really set one another apart. And so it was cool. We shot on a couple different sets of anamorphic films, and then some spherical stuff as well for the more recent time period. And as far as the ASC article, Ian Marks reached out and, liked the film, and I don't know if him and Larry had a history before. I'm not sure if he had interviewed Larry before or something like that, but film had been on his radar, and he liked the idea of it. And so we chatted a little bit about it, and he was like, yeah, let's do a write-up on it. So I was like, sweet.
Yeah. And at that time, were you mostly doing narrative, or were you bumping into commercial at that point?
So, I mean, I still do. I try to do as much narrative as possible. It's usually, usually comes out. I try to do at least 2 narrative projects a year if I can. That's usually kind of what it rounds out to. But I still do a decent amount of commercial and branded stuff. I still do some non-scripted stuff as well. I definitely came up, my first real operating break was on one of Hulu's first shows, operating. It was a docu-series. So I have a big background in operating on docu stuff and non-scripted stuff as well. That was kind of what I was doing early on, as you're, everybody, when you're first out of film school and you're trying to break in, you're, taking every gig you can while also trying to shoot as much stuff as you can, just to, keep building out your reel and keep meeting people and stuff like that. So I still will do some stuff like that every once in a while, but I'm mainly trying to do as much narrative stuff as possible these days.
Yeah. I mean, the commercial, again, looking at your reels, the commercial stuff looks, you've got a good range, because the commercial stuff looks like commercials, and then the narrative stuff is definitely seems more personal.
Yeah. And I'm sure most people in the industry probably feel that way. It's you're always trying to latch on to something a little bit more personable when you're shooting narrative stuff. And, obviously there's a lot more, emotion, and a lot more, you're flexing more of those storytelling muscles. Not that you're not doing that in the commercial world too. Obviously there's a large, huge part of that as well. But, it's different when you're trying to do that in a 30-second spot versus a 90-minute film. You know what I mean? It's a different type of storytelling for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like commercials, we said this before on the podcast, but commercials is where you always get to try new ideas, you get new tools.
Yeah.
Those can inform workflows really on narrative stuff.
For sure. Yeah. You hear and you read all the time. And I've had a little bit of experience that too, where you get to play around with a little bit more things and some more toys, and you can move the camera in ways that you might not have moved them on a narrative thing previously, but then you're like, oh yeah, I worked this out and it worked pretty well on this one project, so maybe we experiment with it. And usually you have a little bit more time on commercials too, because it's you might have 2 days to shoot something that's only gonna be 30 seconds long. Yeah. So you can you can utilize that to your advantage and kind of try some different things, which is always cool.
Yeah. Do you see in your experience that there's because we were talking about Clerks and also just the idea of like music videos back in the day being like an entry point for filmmakers to get bigger things. Yep. But if you're going to like festivals and stuff, are you seeing that Clerks path as still a viable path, like trying to get out there in festivals and whatnot, or did you have to take a slightly different path, or where's your head at the moment with all that?
You mean it's
great, Kenny? That's a terrible fucking question.
No, I mean, yeah, because did you mean as far as like from a cinematography perspective, or like in perspective and stuff like that?
Getting work from either a touchstone piece versus now just kind of like, because it's a leading question, because in my opinion, I think it's, I don't see that anymore. Well, festivals, yes, but making a Clerks, I don't think necessarily immediately gets as much attention as it used to.
Sure. Well, I'll go back to your first part of your question first, which is about like music videos and stuff like that, because music videos were a huge influence on me growing up.
Yeah.
I watched way too much MTV in the 90s. I was, the kid that was like waking up before school, and I would watch like, 30 minutes of, music videos. Because I think by the time I was also like in like junior high and high schools, it was like they really only show music videos like in the morning and at night, because then they would just fill up the rest of the day with like a bunch of kind of like bad TV. And no offense to anybody, because I'm sure I've made bad TV. But
I made no TV, so fuck them.
And so I would always watch like a half an hour music videos like before school and stuff like that. And we're a really big influence on me. Like I loved, some of the early like off the top of my head, like some of the early like Nine Inch Nails music videos I loved. I remember loving the Nine Inch Nails Perfect Drug video for the Lost Highway soundtrack. I remember like loving that music video. And obviously it was like the heyday music videos, it was like when they had big budgets and stuff. By the time I got out of film school, I always really wanted to shoot music videos. It was always like, oh yeah, like I love the experimentation. I love just the medium. I love that you can just, do crazy stuff in music videos, try great lighting tricks, but like I shot a couple, but like I never really fell into that niche. Like I feel like you have to like, I don't know, just like already know the directors, or you have to somehow get in with the production companies who are like making all those music videos. And I never got in that niche. I always wanted to. So I guess if anybody's listening to this, like hire me. I would love to shoot a music video for you. Yeah. But yeah, so I always wanted to, but I never really did. And then, but also by the time I was out of, film school and stuff, it was like, everybody just watches music videos like on like, on like what, Vivo and like YouTube and stuff like that. It's like, like by the time it was like, the couple music videos that I shot, it'd be like, oh yeah, like, we used to give budgets of like $500,000. Now it'd be like, here's $5,000. Like go like shoot something at the beach at magic hour. You know what I mean?
Oh my God. I have so many of those on my fucking reel.
Right. You know what I mean? And it was like, so it was like that whole like heyday music videos, at least like big budget music videos. It's like, now it's like, unless you're like, shooting a Beyonce video or a Taylor Swift video or something like that.
Literally, those are the two people I was going to name. Like, I don't know.
It's like, I can't imagine anybody's getting any, I can't imagine like any sort of like big budget music videos anymore. Not the way that they were in like the 90s. But then as far as like making a splash at a festival, I mean, I think you still can do that. As far as like a filmmaker, I think obviously everything's way more polished these days. It's like everything has like much higher production value than it did, 20, 30 years ago.
Even 10 years ago. I mean, like 12.
Even 10 years ago.
2012, you're talking equipment wise, what? No LEDs.
Right.
And at that point, you're lucky if you could get an Alexa. You're probably shooting on a Sony F3.
Well, yeah. I mean, another thing too is like, because when I think of that time frame, because that was like right after I got out of school, is you did have some stuff that was popping up at Sundance that was like shot on like 5Ds, because that was a big deal. Like the SLR like revolution, what was a big deal. I mean, that's like what everybody was then going out and shooting on. So it was like a lot of indie projects. It was like, oh, I'm going to go shoot this web series on this, or I'm going to go shoot this short film. And I shot, handful of short films on like 5Ds, 7Ds and things like that. just because it was like, yeah, you were scrapping, small stuff together with friends and shooting it and getting out there. And I think there was a handful of movies that like, broke out from that. I don't
Anything Vincent Laforet was doing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, but I don't know if, and you had the whole mumblecore movement that was going on as well, that it was a little bit like maybe a little bit before that. But and I mean, I don't know if it was like leading to people getting direct like a $5 million movie as their second movie, but I think you could still make a splash that way. It's, I don't know. I mean, as far as like how you can, break in the industry, I don't know. Are there other ways than just going out and doing it and seeing if something hits? I don't know.
At this point, I just tell people like, just keep meeting folks.
Right. Yeah.
And be nice and figure it out. I remember too, like going back to the music video thing, that finding out that Spike Jonze and David Fincher, like all the music videos that I liked were made by one of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is fast. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
I didn't know, because I knew there was TV and film in at the time, as you'll recall, that, you did one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't know you could go off and make an Oscar-nominated film and then turn around and make like a skateboard film where things explode.
Yep. Yeah. I still have the Spike Jonze and the Michelle Gondry music video DVDs
right there. Yeah.
I still have those. Yeah, those are great.
Yeah. I've mentioned that box set in the past, and I just found out, for people listening, you can download it. I don't know how great the quality is in comparison, but it's on the Internet Archive now.
Mm-hmm.
Like as full, like not ISOs, but you can download the MP4s or whatever.
That's cool.
So, because everyone cites that. Anyone around our age, probably a few years older than me, but seems to have been like one of the more formative. Because I was a special features girly my whole life, but that box set was like, oh, cool, like that felt for the people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I remember just like sitting around and just popping that DVD in and just watching those things, like those music videos, like over and over again. Yeah.
So did Foxhole springboard you into Blackout, or was there? Is that somehow, are they unconnected?
Yeah. No, they're very much connected, because Blackout was written, directed by Larry, and so it was also a Glass Eye Pix movie. So it was something that I got brought in on because Larry was a producer on Foxhole, and then he had sent me that script, and he said, "Hey, there's this werewolf movie," and he's a big indie horror icon, auteur, in the New York scene, and so he reached out and said, "Hey, why don't you give this a read?" And we're thinking of shooting it in the fall. This was like probably in the spring or something like that, and so then we kind of prepped it throughout the summer off and on, and then shot it in the fall. And so definitely was like one led to the other just by kind of getting in with that production company. And
so talk to me about the prep process on it, because it's being a horror film and being, I'm gonna assume, relatively low budget. You guys did get a few million for it, but how are you developing the look? What were the kind of the considerations when putting together like the shooting package, and how many decent amount of locations in the film? Just walk me through that whole process.
Yeah. So the prep process, I mean, it really started with just going through the script with Larry, just like anything. We went through and we would talk through each scene, and in some scenes we would be really specific with, and then some scenes it was a little bit looser. It was kind of like, all right, yeah, we had a plan. We know we wanted to, maybe attack it this way. And then some stuff, it was real specific. And it was like, yeah, I want, this, and this is the look we're going to go after. And I'd say, like, just generally speaking, we definitely, I think we wanted to have a bit of like a 70s aesthetic. We wanted it to feel a little loose, and one of the big things about the film is that there's a ton of speaking parts. There's a ton of locations.
Yeah.
So for an indie movie, that usually is like a disaster. You know what I mean? Like they always tell you, limit your locations, limit the actors, like don't work with kids and pets, stuff like that.
Right.
We did the
opposite.
opposite.
To special effects feature.
Right. Yeah. It was like the opposite. It was like, yeah, okay, we're going to have like, 25 speaking roles. We're going to have like 23 locations. And so a lot of company moves and a lot of planning around that. Obviously just so that we could like make our days. But yeah, as far as the prep stuff, it was going through the script and be like, all right, well, like, what's the best way to tell a story, and what's the feeling and the emotion of this scene, and what's the best way to get this across, and and so it was a nice mix of handheld filmmaking, a nice mix of more controlled movements, more controlled stuff, I think, depending upon which characters we were with and kind of who we were following. The main character, Charlie, of the film, he's a bit erratic. I don't know if you had a chance to check it out or not, or if you just read about it, but he's a bit erratic, and I think we want that to come through. So he's a loner, and he kind of keeps to himself, and so that was something that we definitely thought, all right, well, how do we highlight that? And do we ramp up the handheld? Do we make it feel a little bit more handheld versus like less handheld in the beginning? And so there's little tricks like that we would do. And then we, as far as like getting ready for the shoot, we did a lot of camera tests. We tested like 5 or 6 different types of lenses before we decided on the Cook Paint Crows is what we ended up going with.
Classic.
We like the vintage feel of those. We like the softness of them, and definitely just like the color is also just a slightly different, like the color variations on them from some of the older lenses as well. And Larry was really into that when we were doing those tests, and so so that's what we went with.
So what were some of the things that were keeping you nimble? Because it's not like an overly lit film. It's leaning into the naturalism. Were there any other considerations? Like, what was the lighting package on it? Did you have kind of like a set thing, or did you go purely scene by scene?
No, I mean, we had a lighting package that we took with us every day, but yeah, I mean, being nimble was key to the film. Like I mentioned before, with there just being so many locations, there was, we, like with any indie movie, you kind of have to like, pick and choose when you want to utilize
Show off.
Yeah, a large setup. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you can't do that every single day. You're not gonna be able to do that at every single thing. But you can pinpoint certain scenes where it's like, okay, this is an important scene. Let's make sure we have an extra 2 hours to pre-light this, or and some people say only 2 hours. Oh my gosh, you know what I mean? Some people are like, I need 2 days to pre-light that, but it was not this kind of movie, not on this one. We be lucky if we'd be able to get in like a half day early or something like that. And a lot of our locations, like I said before, we were in and out in a half a day. But there was a couple locations where we were able to sort of like, try to pre-light and set some stuff where it was like, okay, we're going to be here all day, or we're going to be here for the next 2 days. So let's really like, think about, the prep it and be like, okay, all right, how can we make this look as good as possible? How can we tell the story as good as possible here in this scenario? But I mean, our package was not big though. I mean, we had some, the tried and true. We had some sky panels. We had a couple 120s and a couple 60s for some of our night exterior scenes that we did. We had some other LED Fresnel units. I'm trying to remember. We had a couple apertures, and I think a couple, like 2 or 3 of the 600s. We had so a set of light mats. You know what I mean? I think we had like a 4, 3, and a 2 of light mats. When you want to do just some soft push from the inside on an interior. And yeah, so we had a mix
No
of
tubes.
Oh no, yeah, we had a whole set of tubes. Yeah.
It's just a running joke on this podcast now. Everyone's always like, well, we had the Astera tubes. It's like, a fucking course you did.
No,
we all did.
Yeah, we had a set of those for sure. Yeah, we had a set of those for sure. And I always made sure our gaffer, his name was Zach Hangus, and I always made sure that he was the guy operating those on the iPad.
Tube wrangler.
Right, exactly. But yeah, and so there's a scene, toward the end that takes place in like a jail cell, and again, that was one that we had time to kind of like set up and prep the lighting and go in a little bit, with a little bit more prep behind, which was nice. Although, again, in true indie fashion, it was like initially that scene was written like it was going to be at sunset, and we were going to have all this hard light spraying through the windows. And then, of course, when we were shooting all the exteriors, it was overcast the entire time. And so then you're like, all right, well, what's our decision? Are we going to try to match what we want to do? Do we match what we'd already shot, or do you just go into, full on like, oh, the emotion is right. Let's have this hard light coming in. And so we kind of do a little bit of both, but it's always one of those tough things when you're shooting upstate New York and the weather changes like twice in a day. So
yeah.
a little different than the California style where it's like, oh yeah, you can pretty much know what it's going to be like.
It was raining last night, and now it's sunny. There's weather here.
Yeah.
We had mentioned, obviously, the more prep you do, the smoother the shoot's going to go. But how much were you doing? How much kind of finding it on the day were you doing?
Yeah,
especially those exteriors. There's a lot of those.
Yeah, a lot of exteriors. No, I mean, I'm a big proponent of doing as much prep as you possibly can, especially on indie films, just because you don't have a lot of time. When you don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of money, it's best to be like overly prepared.
And prep is free.
And so I think it's always good to be as prepped as possible. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you should be rigid and, not allow for things to happen on set that, could, change and become magical in its own way, which is always nice. But I think the more prepped you are and the more like confident you are going in, then you can be open to those types of things and feel like, okay, yeah, like we have an idea of like how, emotionally how we want to tell this film emotionally how we want to tell this like specific scene in the story. If you already know the direction you want to go, I think it's easier then to divert from that plan and kind of call an audible. If you already like have a really strong sense of what it's about. Sorry, go back. Your question was about prep.
Just how much you were like kind of making happen on the day.
Right. And so, yeah. And I think Larry did a really good job of, having like, he's very great at just like having like a pretty loose set with the actors and stuff like that. And so it was never one of those scenarios where it was like, hey, we have to do it this way. Like we would come in with a plan, and if things change, we were always pretty open to that. I mean, obviously there's certain scenes where it's like, okay, this has to happen this way. Or, there's a day where we, had a techno crane. It was like, okay, this is like the way the scene's going to play out. And we need the blocking we need the blocking to happen this way, and you need to go this way because it's, it's going to be dictated by like the techno crane. It's going to be dictated by the way the light's hitting and things like that. And so certain things that you plan a lot. And then there's other scenes where it's like there's this crowd scene that takes place like outside of the police station. And that was all kind of shooting from the hip for the most part. You know what I mean? That was kind of the old docu style, muscle memory coming back at that point. I mean, we had an idea of how we want to approach the scene, but as far as just like executing it was like, all right, well, let's, we'll run the rehearsal a few times, then we'll be like, okay, we think, we should put the camera here, we can turn around, we'll go over that way, get this piece, and stuff like that. So there was some figuring out on the day as far as just like, we knew the kind of pieces and that we would need to get. It was just kind of like, all right, well, let's see how the rehearsal goes and see how these scenes go with, when we had like 6, 7, 8 actors in it. And then, we'll kind of have a, plan going in, but then like not be afraid to divert and be like, okay, yeah, actually this moment is really nice that we weren't anticipating. Let's jump in, make sure we get something of that, It's pretty typical, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It always sucks when you get on like no, it has to be this way. Like, all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a much bigger fan of path of least resistance, especially on like indie stuff or anytime you're handed no budget. Like, let's just do what'll get us 90% of the way there instead of really fighting for that 10,
Sure.
Save everyone at it.
Yeah. It's, it's tough because it's, again, being a cinematographer, and I feel like the DP on set always like, you're one of those people that I just feel like you have to be prepared, and, you're always kind of like aiding in the back of your head a little bit. And, but at the same time, like you want to be careful of like what the actors are doing, because that's very important. You don't want to like put them in boxes, and you don't want to, have them feel like they are being too restrained and like they don't have the creative freedom to be making like, interesting decisions. So, it's a tough dance. It's like, you're always trying to like, make sure that, you're respecting, what they're doing, but then you're also trying to like, make sure that the, movie is, looking as good as it possibly can be, It's everyone's working together most of the time. So that's great.
Was there a scene that you can think of offhead that like provided like a unique challenge? And if so, like how'd you tackle it?
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, so many.
You can go through a couple. Fuck it. It's an educational podcast at the end of the day.
I would say one of the scenes that I like the most, it's a very simple scene. It's the scene between like two of the police officers, and it takes place like in the police station. And it's a simple scene of two officers talking, and then they exit and leave and go out to the police car, right? And we'd started talking about it, and it was like, let's, okay, we're going to do this, and then come over here, we'll get an interesting wide and then piece of coverage. And I was like, you know what? Like, what if we just start on this, like, basically, like, all these newspaper clippings that are behind them, and we just pull out and we just do it all in one. You know what I mean? We'll just do a real simple dolly out. They can keep doing the dialogue and blah, 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 and then they'll exit out of the scene. And we did it like that. And I think it's one of my favorite scenes in the film, just because it's like, I think it gives the actors a lot of room to do what they want to do. And I think it's just, and yeah, I feel like sometimes, simplicity is nice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, not everything needs to be like, I don't know, crazy chaotic and super cutty. And I don't know, maybe that's just my aesthetic too, is I think I tend to have a bit more of a European approach to things as far as like editorially anyway.
I think a oner's a great way to keep people from editing it.
That's also true. Anytime you can do a oner, then it just makes everyone's job a little easier in post-production. Yeah. I mean, another scenario is, when we were doing any sort of night exterior, obviously is always kind of tougher in an indie film, because your crew's not going to be very large, and you're not going to have a ton of time and a ton of prep. But we, again, like as I mentioned before, when you can sort of make sure that you're isolating those like important days where you're like, okay, this is one that we need like a half day to set up the lighting and stuff like that. And so we were able to do that for one of our night exteriors. And again, doing the most with what you have, we're just hiking up. At one point we were talking about, we did this sort of, it's the opening scene of the film. Have you seen it or no? Have you?
Yeah, they sent me the screener last night. Oh, I've been coloring 2 projects and editing a 3rd one. So I skipped through it. I got a good idea of the way it looks. I don't have the story locked in.
All good. Well, the opening of the film, I don't know if you watched the opening shot.
Yeah.
It's also sort of like a bit of this like oner, and these are 2 young people in love. It is a horror film, so they it doesn't end well for them. That's not much of a spoiler because it's the opening scene of the film. But that was a
Zodiac.
Well, you're right. Yeah, exactly. And so that was, a night exterior. And, we initially had, I was like looking, I was like, okay, well, maybe we'll do a balloon, because it's a big open field, and, we're shooting at night. And one of the big things that Larry and I talked about in pre-production, this is, and it's funny, actually, I'd love to get your opinion on this too. And because you talked to so many different cinematographers, but, the idea of what night should look like, right, is a big thing, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
Should it be blue? Is it regular? Because Larry and I talked, and big part of our prep when we were going through the scenes was like, neither of us are a huge fan of like blue lighting, what I mean, as far as like the night lighting. Like
That's late 80s chic.
And it
colored HM or unaffected HMI from behind.
Yeah. And if you're not careful, it can very much feel like that late 80s or early 90s, like hard blue backlight that, it is. Honestly, I feel like I have found like an affection for over the years, but like used to be very adverse to. And Larry and I were like, yeah, we don't really want to do any blue light. And it's like, well, this is a werewolf movie. Like, there's got to be moonlight, right? Like, it has to exist in the world. It's a movie about a werewolf. How could it not, right? And so the rest of the film, outside of like 1 or 2 scenes, the rest of the film, it was like we very much approached it. Again, like I am apparently very unoriginal, but it was very much like Fargo inspired, you know what I mean? Where it's like, there's no blue light in that film. It's like, when they're doing that car chase scene out in the middle of nowhere, it's all motivated by headlights, it's headlights and it's rear lights. And so that was a big part of our like sort of visual language for the film was like, all right, well, we're not going to do a lot of like hardback blue light or anything like that. We just want to do stuff that's like motivated from the world. But in the opening scene, it's 2 people, making out in a field by themselves at midnight. So it's like, there's no practicals in this world. You know what I mean? It is just moonlight. So, you have to say, all right, well, how much are we going to like lean into this? Well, we got to lean into it a little bit. And so that was one where we're like, all right, well, we're we're going to start looking into getting a helium balloon. I was like, all right, let's put a balloon out in this field because then we can have this nice big soft source. We don't have to worry about like hiding stands. We don't have to worry about, it'll get a lot of headaches out of the way if we can just like get this big source like up in the air and then, and then that'll be it.
Yeah.
But when I started calling around, and I think I heard someone else talk about this once before, there was a huge helium shortage at the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Helium was like crazy expensive if you could even find it. Even if you could even find it, and if you could, it was just extremely expensive. So it was like very
party cities across the world were screwed.
Right. So it was very cost prohibitive. So that quickly went out the door. Like after me, like a week of pricing stuff and calling places, it was like, well, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to like rethink this. And so then we just went to a tried and true kind of like big soft like LED sources that we threw up on stands and and that ended up being kind of the approach.
Well, I'm trying not to sneeze. Sorry. The night thing is funny because technically, like we all think of night as like, as you said, being blue or being really soft.
Mm-hmm.
But the moon is the same size. Like this is the way I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so two things, right? One, you either go hypernatural and you go with what we believe the moon to be, that hard blue thingy, or you go realistic. I mean, I was just watching The Great Escape the other day.
Yep.
And when they come out of the grass towards the end, they just put a giant tungsten light on it. Like it looks like day. Like they don't even try to make it look like nighttime. It's just like you needed to see them.
Right.
And they could have motivated by the searchlight, but then that would suggest that they saw them. So it's just lit.
Yeah.
But yeah, the moon is the same size as the sun in the sky, which is a weird fact. I don't know how the universe made that happen. Shout out to eclipses. But so theoretically, the light would still be as hard as sunlight.
Yeah, and when it is a full moon, I mean, it is pretty hard. I mean, you see hard shadows when the full moon is out. So I mean that checks out as far as like the naturalistic approach. And so yeah, we tried to, I feel like I always try to have a bit of a naturalistic approach to whatever I'm doing. At least that's like.
But I think in that scene, a hard light wouldn't work. It would feel like the sun.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, exactly. It would feel hard because then it's like if you have these super hard shadows, I don't know, for some reason it does feel harder, even though like a full moon does have hard shadows in real life, but it feels inauthentic for some reason when you're doing it in filmmaking though, for some reason.
So this is the thing. I've said it a million. I want to make a t-shirt, but I know no one will buy it. Maybe a mug. I've said it a million times. Like a lot of times emotionally correct trumps technically correct.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what an audience will buy, I mean, is always covered by whatever whatever's emotionally resonating, like within the story or within the scene. I think, you can get away with a lot. You can get away with tons of stuff if it's like just emotionally correct.
Well, that's the other thing too, is like, it's always, in my opinion, it's always important to watch tons of other films, especially ones that, like, when I was younger, I was a kind of a punk rock contrarian. So anything anyone else liked, I was like, nah, I don't like that. And so, but those are the films that or music or whatever that informs the general audience. And like, I kind of think of it as like being a DJ. Like your job as a DJ is not to go to a party and educate people. Mm-hmm. Questlove has a great story in his masterclass about how he went to the White House and was trying to show off by showing how much he knows about music. And Obama walks up to him and goes like, hey man, no one's having fun.
Play some stuff people know.
Yeah. Play the hits. And I think that's kind of the case with like cinematography, is like you can get so nerdy about it, but will the audience, like, it's fun to put references in or whatever for like other DPs, but like we're saying, like if the general audience doesn't buy that it's moonlight, they're gonna think it looks cheap, even if it's technically correct.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why you're here. You're hoping that the audience buys into it. So, if the audience is noticing the cinematography, then you probably haven't really done your job. That's kind of how I feel about it a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's what's that quote from Harrison Ford where he's talking to? Have you heard this? Where he's talking to Mark Hamill after they get out of the trash compactor in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, I guess Mark was like, "Hey, shouldn't my hair be wet?" And why did I just blank on his name? I just said it. Harrison Ford goes like, "Hey, kid, if they're paying attention to your hair, we're in a lot of trouble."
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So the film, where is it? It's in festivals now, or where can people see it, or can they see it?
Yeah. So Blackout, it was in festivals the second half of last year. Played at like Fantasia and Sitges, and I think it's at Overlook right now down in New Orleans.
Sick.
Yeah, and so it's playing there right now, but it just finished up its run in New York. It played at IFC Center in New York for like a week and a half, and it's playing Los Angeles, I think, starting this week, maybe it's next. Yeah. So it's playing a couple theaters in LA next week, and then it'll be on VOD, I believe, April 12th.
When now I'm just taking notes. When's that screening in LA?
April 11th, April 12th, April 13th. And then it might be playing throughout that week at one of those theaters. So I think it's basically like opening next April, like on April 11th in LA, and it's playing a couple different theaters, I think, throughout that next week.
Gotcha. Well,
I think it's playing up in I think it's playing in NoHo. I think it's playing on the West Side, and it looks like.
What's the West Side? Now this isn't even a podcast. This is just me planning.
Yeah, and then also it's playing at Lamely in Glendale in NoHo, and then it's playing someplace in Hollywood. It looks like, but I don't. So I apologize. I misspoke.
No, I can look it up from there. Yeah. But yeah, that's right in my neighborhood. That's great. Oh yeah, how's the reception been to it? Have you been at those screenings?
Yeah, I've gone to a couple of them. I went up to Fantasia for the original premiere, which was a lot of fun up in Montreal. That was cool. And yeah, I mean, I think people are digging it. It's a fun genre movie. If you like genre movies, I think you'll be into it. It's funny, Larry always says that he makes horror movies, but without very many horror elements in them, because a lot of his movies are, like a lot of, good horror movies are, there's a lot more like social commentary in them. Right. It's a lot about humanity and the goods and bads of humanity, and I think that's a lot of what Larry's films are about. And so it's interesting because I think I think he has a pretty nice sized fan base and people like his films, but then I think like hardcore horror people are like, oh, there wasn't like enough, there wasn't enough like blood in that for me, there wasn't enough kills in that. So he always jokes around and says that he makes horror movies for like horror adjacent fans, not like he makes horror movies for not like they're not like splatter flicks or anything like that.
Yeah.
But but that being said, there's a little bit of splatter in this movie. So
I really am excited to see a potential resurgence of genre films, because there's, like you said, there's always like a deeper meaning to everything. Yeah, the classic like Night of the Living Dead, is a
Romero films.
Yeah, it's just a very thinly veiled social commentary, but they're just constantly fun, and I think especially post Endgame, I literally in my head I think the film industry right now is pre and post Avengers Endgame.
Marvel especially, and pre and post pandemic, pre and post 2019 for sure. But as far as resurgence of genre stuff. Yeah, I think horror films for sure. Yeah, people come out.
Horror's huge.
Yeah, people want to come out for that stuff. People want.
But comedy, not so much. Which those two are usually like the easy. But people want to completely escape.
Comedy's kind of harder these days. You have a lot of people who feel like it's just difficult. Although, I don't know, some of the rom-com stuff's coming back. There's some of those in theaters, but yeah, I think horror will always have a place. But yeah, stuff that I think if you can get people to come out, because it's like it's a community thing, right? Seeing a movie together in a big theater, and I think whether it's a big action movie with tons of set pieces, or a genre film, horror film, or I love neo-noirs. I love I just saw Love Lies Bleeding recently. I thought that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. And I think people will come out if it's if it's an interesting, different type of movie. I think people will come out there, and obviously, there's built-in audiences for a lot of stuff, whether it's horror, LGBTQ, or comedy. Like you said, it's like I think people will come out for it. So.
Totally. Did you see Dark City?
Dark City, the
one right before The Matrix.
Right, yeah. Was that with Keith Suffer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it like once, but it was some time ago. Yeah.
I think I watched it for the first time last year. Just when you said neo-noir, I immediately thought, oh, on Criterion they had a black and white Johnny Mnemonic. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's not really a neo-noir, but they make it feel that way with the black and white. And then I was like, oh wait, Dark City was actually one that I'm like, more people need to see Dark City.
Yeah, I remember liking it. It's been a while since I've seen it. I do remember. I remember liking it. It also reminds me of what was that? I watched this one recently, just like a year or so ago. It was a Catherine Bigelow film from around the same time. This is great.
Strange Days.
Strange Days. Yes, Strange Days. Oh yeah, it was a great podcasting. Yeah, Strange Days. I thought I watched that like a year and a half ago or so, like that, and I really like that too. Again, like a neo noir, but with like sci-fi bends to it. It's it's a fun one as well.
I'm definitely also ready for more sci-fi. Like, where the hell? Like, Arrival was like 10 years ago. Like, what happened?
Well, you get Dune. He's been making Dune. That's what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I love Dune, but I just mean like we got the one.
You're right. Yeah.
Did you see the second one?
I did. Yeah, I saw it in IMAX. Or I'm sorry, I saw it in 70 mil. I didn't see it in IMAX, but I saw it in 70 mil.
Good stuff.
Great. Yeah, I liked it. Yeah, I mean, honestly, walking out of it, I mean, obviously the scope of it is just massive and so impressive, and what Greg Fraser's been able to do when he has those giant scope films is just like daunting. But very, very humbling when you're from my perspective of shooting these like $sub-$1 million movies. But it's pretty impressive. But honestly, walking out of that, I was just like, the sound was incredible. Like the sound, seeing that on a huge screen in just like an impressive theater, like the sound was just like mind-boggling. I thought it was incredible. Yeah,
I saw it in not the Dolby theater, but I saw it in like one of the Atmos theaters, and or whatever they are, the Dolby, and they must be putting subwoofers in the chairs. Because I had to say, I was like, dude, this is like an earthquake.
Yeah, I felt like my ears weren't working properly like the second half of the day. Like I saw it on like an afternoon screening, and it was like, yeah, I walked out. I was just like, the rest of the day, I was like, man, everything feels like. I remember we were actually screening Blackout like late. Was it that night or the next night? I remember I just like went over to Larry like after the movie started. I was like, dude, you gotta pump this up, man. Turn it up. It's not loud enough, And I'm like, I also like saw Dune recently, so maybe I'm just reacting to the fact that I feel like everything needs to be like blowing my eardrums out. But but it's very effective. It's a very well done movie.
Yeah. Was that's usually actually my question at the beginning of the podcast was what's the last thing you watched? But was it Dune?
I saw Dune recently. Like let's see, one of the last things I liked a lot was the new Wim Wenders film, Perfect Days.
Oh, see that right there. That makes sense. I saw him. He did like a Criterion Closet, and he did like a few. I was like, when did this guy start doing promo? And it's for movie.
Yeah, he had his new film, Perfect Days. I thought was really, really beautifully made. It's very simple, straightforward storytelling, and just beautiful cinematography, and very understated. But I thought it was great, and I really liked it a lot.
Yeah.
And I guess that brings us back full circle to Bobby Mueller and Texas and stuff like that. So I guess I'm not very surprising at all.
Yeah, I mean,
but no, I thought that was really nice. I like that quite a bit.
Check. Now I got two things to check out. Well, that hour fucking flew by.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for talking to me, man. I'm gonna go check out this the screening. I'm not even gonna check back in with the Vimeo. I'm just gonna go to the screening on the 11th and then go straight to NAB.
There you go. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Of course, man. Yeah.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by Pro Video Coalition. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can go to frameandrefpod.com and follow the link to buy me a coffee. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.